Welcome back. What is tougher than taking on the full weight of the Justice Department and the FBI in court? The answer, doing it without a lawyer or doing it without a superstar lawyer. And that is reportedly the hurdle that's facing Donald Trump right now. According to the Washington Post, Trump's team is desperately trying to assemble the country's top lawyers to defend him, but their invitations are being declined. According to the lawyers that the Post spoke with, Trump is considered an impossible client who doesn't listen to advice. And one lawyer also said he's afraid that Trump wouldn't pay him at the end of the trial. And since I work in legal news, I'm here to tell you it's about the 7th or 8th time I have read that story over the last many years. Many lawyers have had the same complaints. So it's not the first time we're hearing it, and it's not just political. It happened even before he was in the political arena. So Trump's friends and advisors say that the former president's current lawyers have little to no experience in federal cases like this. And that could be a big problem because a judge agreed that there was probable cause that Trump may have violated the Espionage Act, among other very serious federal crimes related to that Mar-a-Lago search. And speaking of that search, Donald Trump is reportedly considering releasing the security footage of the FBI while they were at Mar-a-Lago. He says he kept his closed-circuit TV cameras running during the entire search. He also said that the agents had asked him to turn it off, but that he had refused. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know about you. Joining me now, Jack Tomarchio. He is an attorney and was the Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence at the Department of Homeland Security. And still with me, Chris Whipple, a political commentator and documentary filmmaker. Okay, I'd like to start with you, Jack, if I can. The level of lawyering that's required. Can you grade that for me in the cases that we're talking about right now?
Well, Ashleigh, I'll tell you this. This is not the A team. It's probably not even the B team. The A team and the B team have taken the train out of town for many reasons. As you said earlier, the ex-president, is known to be an extremely difficult client. He's very tough to manage. He doesn't take legal advice well, doesn't take legal advice at all in some cases. And in other cases, he has a reputation of not paying his bills. I personally know of two attorneys. One was actually a law school classmate of mine that did work for Donald Trump before he was president, and he stiffed them, both of them. And so they determined that instead of going into litigation against him, which would be protracted and expensive, they would just write the bill off. So there's a lot of reasons why law firms and lawyers, especially really the top flight law firms, would stay away from this client because he's just in many cases just too toxic to handle.
That word does get around, especially when you're the caliber, the visibility of Donald Trump. So, and by the way, we're not just talking about the Mar-a-Lago thing, right? We're not just talking about that potential criminal exposure. We're also talking about the D.C. grand jury looking into the January 6th business. We're talking about the Georgia election fraud case that's ongoing right now. And we're talking about the New York civil case, among other cases. But those are pretty serious. So, Chris, you wrote in the op-ed in 2020 about Trump being, quote, the unbriefable president, and top officials have said that they think he's a security risk. The video you're seeing right there is his lawyer, his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who is trying to get through the throng of reporters today to walk up to a deposition in a civil or in a Georgia district attorney matter regarding the issue of election fraud, about propagating the use of a fake slate of electors to overturn the 2020 election. So he walked through that throng. It was pretty hard to hear a lot of it, but here's what we caught on some mics. Have a listen.
We will not talk about this until we go to the grand jury, and grand juries, as I recall, are secret.
And we're not talking about this. Grand juries are secret, and that's exactly the way he came out of that building, too. All we know is that he was in there for 6 hours. But, Chris, I guess the biggest question here is with top officials thinking that he was a security risk, a lot of people are wondering if he was up to something sinister or if he was just a sloppy president, and that resulted in the mess we saw last Monday.
Well, Trump truly was the unbriefable president, as I wrote back in 2020. You couldn't tell him anything he didn't want to hear. He wouldn't read the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. In fact, he and Steve Bannon would mock it. I mean, this is someone who had contempt for intelligence, classified or otherwise. And so to me, the notion that he squirreled away these documents with some master plan to spirit them away to Mar-a-Lago and monetize them or blackmail Emmanuel Macron is really far-fetched. I think what was going on here, my gut tells me that this is just, Donald Trump is a rule breaker. The point here was breaking the rules. The point here was being defiant and saying, as he was quoted recently, they're not theirs, they're mine. I mean, I think it may well be as simple as that.
By the way, another one of his lawyers, John
Eastman. Which is not to minimize
go ahead, say it again.
Which is not to minimize what he's done, because whether those documents are classified or not, that's a crime. I mean, just ask David Petraeus, ask John Deutsch, the CIA director under Clinton, ask Sandy Berger. None of them were behind bars, but they all suffered the consequences.
Well, and the Espionage Act doesn't require them to be classified. They just require them to be Department of Defense and very important documents, and being in possession of them can be the crime. But listen, this is unprecedented. So a lot of people would say, are you really going to go after the president for something that may have been inadvertent? That's an argument that can be made. But John Eastman, his other lawyer, has now been ordered, although he fought it, to go to Georgia, take a midnight train to Georgia and testify as well. And then Alan Weisselberg, the Trump Organization CFO, is going to plead guilty tomorrow in the case that has been ongoing for a couple of years now. And he has said that if the New York case goes ahead against Trump Organization, he will actually testify. So there's a lot of fronts to be battling on. And Jack, tomorrow, that federal judge is going to rule whether the affidavit can be unsealed. My spidey senses of doing legal journalism for a couple decades is hell no. But the other argument is unprecedented actions may require unprecedented transparency. What do you think?
Actually, I would agree with you. Hell no. I don't think that the DOJ is going to want to release that affidavit for several reasons. That affidavit contains some most likely very sensitive intelligence or intelligence matters and information that it was used to back up that warrant. And, we talk about the intelligence community sources and methods. There's probably sources in there. There may even be some methods as to where this information came from. The DOJ doesn't want that information to be in the public glare of public scrutiny right now, and they certainly don't want that to be in the glare of the scrutiny of Trump's lawyers, no matter how good or bad they are. Also, the other thing that will probably contain is some nuggets of how the case is being built. So again, you don't really want to show the opposing side your game plan. So I think that DOJ will work real hard and argue strenuously that those matters should not be displayed or open to the press and open to the public.
Well, there's still a lot of debate and a lot of discussion around this. That's what makes my job busy and exciting all at the same time. Chris Whipple and Jack Tomarchio, thank you both. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.